afternoon or good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name's Eva and I'm one of the education officers here at Education Scotland. Absolutely thrilled to be bringing you Niki this afternoon as our guest presenter, joining us all the way from South Africa as well. And you'll see from the session descriptor that Niki is a really special guest. Before joining Education Scotland, I was a ELC, Early Learning Childcare practitioner in West Lothian, and this is where I first discovered the fantastic work of Niki. So it would have been around about 2007, you can keep me right, Niki, and it was through the work of Mind Stretchers alongside Claire Warden. So we were quite a newly open centre. We were starting to discover talking tubs, floor books, and really what child-led inquiry was truly all about. Some of you may remember the Look, Look and Look Again books for each season that Claire and Niki co-authored. And I think that's what that was our hook in. That really got us as a team to open our eyes and start to notice and see all the provocations of our outdoor environment. Then not long after that, I think, Niki, that's when you moved to Australia.
That's right.
Yep, and
14 years ago.
14 years ago. So it wasn't until last year actually. I was at a weekend event up in Fife called Practitioner Fest. So this was a festival celebrating all things outdoor play, organised by Louise from Little Bugs Nurseries, and Niki was a keynote speaker there. Later on in the day, she popped into the tent that myself and STEM colleague Mary Thompson were in, and that's when we got the chance to say hi. So I've not told Niki I'm going to say this, okay, but I'm going to tell you a funny story, quite an embarrassing story. But anyway, along with my kit, I had brought one of my DIY light box examples. So Perspex box, simple fairy batteries, string fairy batteries, lights, tin foil, baking paper, and all inside a box. So I had it out on the table amongst other bits and pieces of technology and, really simple bits and pieces, and I saw Niki having a wee look at it and I said, oh, this is great, isn't it? I saw this online a couple of years ago, so wonderful to be able to reuse, recycle materials. I was absolutely none the wiser. And then a wee while later on, very diplomatically, Niki mentioned that she'd co-authored a book in 2016. Title of the session tonight was this one, and she'd asked if I had read it. I had not, so later on that day, just before I'd gone home, I popped to the tent next door where the natural learning stand. I think actually, Niki, I might have even met your husband that day. I think he might have been there with us. I bought the books, yes. Got home, and I read about the instructions for a DIY light box. So you can imagine I was super embarrassed. But Niki did not say a word. So please get comfy, enjoy this session. It is being recorded. Please feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat and we will come back to them at the end. So I'll now hand over to Niki and enjoy, everybody. Thanks, Niki.
Thank you very much, Eva. It's lovely to meet so many people again. I did see one or two familiar names, so maybe there's some more hiding down there. I'm originally from South Africa, as you gather from my accent, and then lived in Scotland for 10 years, and then as a consultant, and then 12 years in Australia, and just returned to Scotland. So I'm based in Scotland again, in Falkirk. I don't know if anybody else is from Falkirk, but that's where I'm based at the moment. So I'm very excited to be with you today and to talk about digital technology or digital literacy. Because what I'm seeing and what concerns me is increasingly people are putting children in front of TVs or in front of a screen, and information is fed to the children. And I'm going, but they're supposed to play. That's their number one job, is to play and to explore and discover and investigate. And that's one of the reasons we wrote the book, because we felt that was vitally important. So I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on digital literacy, and then I'm going to share with you lots of ideas that will motivate the children or stimulate them, very simple ideas, and that will help them develop their digital literacy, because you need certain skills like problem solving and and creativity and so many other skills as well. So we'll share that with you. So let's get started. This is in the olden days. I'm not quite as old as this, but I'm pretty close to it. And if you look how these children play and how they have opportunities, there's no adults there. You can see they've obviously created something out of a pushchair or a pram. There's an old Singer, looks like a Singer sewing machine on the bin there. So many objects for children to tinker with. So before, digital technology, this is what children did. They played, explored, tinkered, designed, they created, they constructed, they failed, they took risks, they tried again, and we had freedom and we had time. And sadly, that's very often lacking for our children because a lot of things are structured and structured by adults. So what we have to remember is that children seek knowledge. They seek to know more about the world around them and they ask questions. Somebody said children ask something like 400 and something questions a day. No wonder, we as practitioners are exhausted at the end of the day, and parents too. They ask questions, they look, they listen. They want to know what's going around them. This little child was fascinated by my camera, and he pressed all the buttons. And then afterwards, I got the camera back, and I had to figure out how to use it again because he changed all the settings. They just do it very confidently. They're born curious and they're born problem solvers. And somewhere along the way, very often that gets lost. Here's an example of my grandson's curiosity. What happens when you throw the sparkly, noisy, colorful ball into the toilet bowl? Now, what else should you use a toilet bowl for? That's a nice, convenient open hole, and you can throw things into it. I did fish it out and I did clean it, and he went back to playing with it. But he had to explore that. One of the things that we do as practitioners is that we prepare learning provocations. Now, if you Google the word provocation, they're all negative. It's all about arguing or, sort of a negative connotation. But what we're going to talk about is learning provocations. So a learning provocation is something that has been carefully prepared. It's an open-ended activity or an environment. And what that does, it's to stimulate curiosity, encourage exploration, and spark the critical thinking and deeper learning in children. It serves as an invitation for children to wonder, to question, to investigate, and from their own interests without prescribed outcomes. Now, this is using AI. This is what AI tells me. So I find it very hard to research anything on the computer now because when you put a question in, AI gives you a really good answer. So why not use it, just making sure that it's correct. So I'm going to, a number of my text is from AI, just to show you that it is quite thorough, but how we link that to a practical session. So here's some items to consider for provocations. So things like interesting books or photos, natural elements or specimens. It could be a leaf. It could be a rock. Conceptual themes. So looking at changing seasons or light or gravity. Familiar materials presented in new ways. As soon as you change the way you present something, when you've got your classroom and then you change things around, suddenly the children notice it. It's exactly the same stuff you had before, but because you've changed the position, they notice it. We look at children's interests, some unique objects, things that might not be in your center necessarily, so magnets or maps, new creative mediums, and then thought-provoking questions. So you could provocate learning through a clever question. This little toddler is obviously still learning how to use the phone. He is now very adept at it. So what is digital literacy? Digital literacy is most effective when it's meaning and relevant to young children, when it's hands-on and integrated into play through natural exploration and curiosity. So we must hold on to that. putting children in front of a screen to watch a program is not the same thing as digital literacy. So Arnott, Lawn and Gillen said young children's meaningful engagement in digital literacy in an educational setting would be fostered by the expansion of early literacy curricula that recognize the fusion of online and offline, as well as screen and non-screen based technological activities that characterize much of everyday life, including in future employment and leisure time. So linking, for example, a child exploring a river with a magnifying glass, and then you might take a photograph and discuss the photograph. There you've linked the digital photograph and the magnet. Oh, not the magnet, the magnifying glass. There are a lot of resources available, digital resources. I Googled children's microscopes, and this is a fraction of what was actually on the page. I think a microscope is brilliant because that's the next step up from a magnifying glass. Very often magnifying glasses are scratched and you actually can't see anything through them. They are, they're not transparent anymore, a transparent lens. So the next step up would be, the progression would be to get a microscope. It could be a little handheld one where the child can go and look at the bug, or it could be more like a laboratory microscope, and a telescope, all these amazing resources available to us. So we guide children to use technology to express ideas, solve problems, and explore the world, rather than just passively consuming content. Okay? And that's what usually happens, is children just sit there and they might not even be listening really. They might just be looking at the pictures, but they're just passively consuming content rather than being challenged and really aware of what's happening in that space. Here's an environment where there's a lot for children to explore. It's partly loose parts. It's got a full tin of something. I can't quite see what that is, but that's got weight. It's got shiny things. It's got pouring things. It's got ceramic things, just lots of interesting objects for children to explore and wonder about. UNICEF says that digital literacy goes beyond technical know-how. It refers to the knowledge, the skills, and attitudes that allow children to be both safe and empowered in an increasingly digital world. This encompasses their play, participation, socializing, searching, and learning through digital technology. What constitutes digital literacy will vary according to the children's age, the local culture, and the context. Obviously, it will look different when you're working with a 6-month-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old. It will look different. But what we have to remember is that the younger the child, the more we need to allow them to explore, discover, investigate, and play, which is the important one. The other thing we have to look at is preventing overstimulation and shortened attention span, because very often that fast-paced digital content can overstimulate young minds, potentially impacting their focus on slower, more reflective activities. I'm finding a lot of children have very poor attention span, and programs that my children watched, and they all adults, and I'm a grandmother now, so they've got their own children. But the programs my children enjoyed as children, they look at now and they go, oh, that's dead boring. It's so slow. Nothing's happening. But we have to be careful that we don't provide a stimulation that will shorten their attention spans and that overstimulates them. So that's a slight risk. Also, digital literacy. So through active, playful, and inquiry-led engagement, young children are supported to acquire the foundations for digital learning that are deepened and refined as they move through the education system. So active, playful, and inquiry-led engagements. effective learning practices are connected to problem solving, exploration, skill acquisition, collaborative learning, social interaction, creation, and the capacity to criticize. Okay, so it's not all about digital. To be able to work in the digital world, you've got to be able to problem solve. You've got to be able to explore. You've got to be able to accept criticism, etc. Sometimes we can use digital tools to draw and record and compose, and that can foster creativity and communication. So this little child has drawn something on the board. Great. We've also got to make sure that we have age-appropriate content. So if you're selecting apps and digital material, they've got to be appropriate for preschoolers focusing on learning, creativity, and problem solving. Can you see how often problem solving comes in there and creativity? And these are some of the elements we're finding some children are struggling with. Here's another example. This was at a museum, at the science center, and an older child had started drawing, and the toddler came along and he wanted to join in. The older child persevered a little bit longer, and then the toddler has no idea of that's your side of the board and this is my side. So they just take over. But the older child was quite happy with that, and after a while she left. But the little one's learning from the older one. So again, Arnott, Lorna, and Gillen, Julia, said that the research shows quite clearly that children can be empowered by digital devices. So they're not all bad. When they're offered appropriate opportunities, how we offer these opportunities is often framed by those guiding and supporting children in their learning. So us as educators or practitioners, we are guiding and supporting children in their learning. And we've got to make sure that we do it correctly. So the places like libraries, museums, and other venues for informal learning can offer opportunities for children's multimedia creativity and play, as well as for information seeking. More research and development is required on the collaboration of different professions across spaces and disciplines. So I'm finding that whenever we go to a museum or a science center or a public library, there is technology being offered that's actually appropriate for lots of different ages. So worth looking at. Here's an example. This is in the Transport Museum. This is my little grandson, absolutely loves pressing this button. And if the children don't listen, the other children in the place that he doesn't even know don't stop there, he can tell them quite, clearly that this means you've got to stop. And he explains the signs. So he knows the sequence of this. And then that reflects on the outside world as well, where, you push a button to cross the road. This all is part of digital literacy. This is digital literacy. So, this is about the problem solving, trying to work out how things work. I don't know if you can see on the bottom picture, there's a sort of a tinkering table with record players and not record players, like tape decks, etc., and screwdrivers, etc., that children can use to take them apart to see what's inside. Because digital technology is like magic. You press a button and something happens. And if a toy is broken, it's very hard to repair. Whereas when my children were little, it's usually a cog that was wrong or something that was wrong that I could fix. Whereas nowadays, there's no ways I can fix some of the things that go wrong because they're too complex. So again, this stimulation, and like the old-fashioned telephone, it's old-fashioned, but it's in my lifetime, telephone fascinated this child. And then the cleaner that cleans the floor, the little robot, he wanted to know exactly, and he was asking what all the different bits are in there. So it's a good idea to have what we call a tinkering table, where children can take apart objects and put them together again, try and fix them. One of the things we have to look at in how we present our environment is the kind of questions we ask. Okay, so if you're exploring details, you might ask questions like, what is it doing? How does it feel? If you're looking for precise information, how many, how much, how heavy, we're very good at that one, generally. You know, if a child brings us something, we tend to immediately say, oh, what color is it? What shape is it? Meanwhile, the child probably couldn't care, couldn't care what color or shape it is. The child is more interested in what it feels like tickling in his hand, a little bug. If you're looking at classifying, you could ask questions like, how are they the same? How are they different? Predictions? What if? And then the rest. Reflection? Why do you think that? Can you explain that? Problem solving would be, how could we? And then you problem solve together. Basically, to develop higher order scientific thinking skills, I like to ask I wonder questions. So I would say, I wonder how they are alike. I wonder how they are different. Because I wonder means I don't necessarily know the answer, which means the child doesn't feel is being tested. Okay, whereas these ones with precise information, that I'm going to delete now, precise information, those are testing questions. And if you've got a child who's at all anxious or stressed and you ask a testing question, you lose that child. Okay, so these are some of the questions that you could use to enrich your environment. This is an amazing play space. Now, as the adult, you might think, oh no, they're going to get wet, it's going to rain. But to the child, this is a wonderland. There's so many possibilities and opportunities. Piaget says, when you teach a child something, you take away forever his chance of discovering it for himself. So I love to provocate or put something out, and then I watch the children discover and see what do they do with it without interfering. There's a very big difference between interference and interaction. Lillian Katz distinguished between academic learning and intellectual learning. So academic learning is stuff that is clear, like the alphabet. You don't need any logic. You have to memorize. Okay? It does have to be learned eventually, whereas intellectual learning is to do with reasoning, hypothesizing, predicting, theorizing, and so forth, and that is natural, says Lillian Katz. So you will have children that are really good at memorizing. They probably know their times tables and they know a lot of stuff, but it's been memorized. Whereas the intellectual learner is the one who probably understands how it actually all fits together. Okay, so I tend to put more emphasis on the intellectual learning than memorizing. Even just, looking at this child blow a bubble, I wonder why the bubble's gone that shape. And if you use, because obviously the child doesn't see this when they're doing the blowing, but if you use this evidence that you've taken and have a conversation with the child, look at this amazing bubble that you blew. You actually blew nearly 2 bubbles, and the one split loose, and then you can have a whole conversation about this bubble blowing. So let's look at some ideas and things that we could explore with children. And a lot of these come from the book that Eva mentioned. So exploring the concept of reflections. And now, what is a reflection? It's an image seen in a mirror or a shiny surface. So that could be, a shiny teapot or a mirror, or like in here, like the water. It's the throwing back by a body or surface of light, heat, or sound without absorbing it. So this would be the picture of the child, so light on the water, the smooth water, and then it's being reflected back up again. This hasn't been absorbed. What's interesting is babies from about 20 months onwards realize that the image in a mirror is actually themselves. So one of the things we tend to have very often is mirrors. There's a lot you can do with mirrors. You can have them static like this. I was sitting at the hairdresser the other day and I was looking in the mirror and I actually thought about it and thought it's really disconcerting because what I think is left is right and what I think is right is left. It's all back to front. So it's quite an abstract medium. You probably all know the little square box with the mirrors in, some loose parts, and the children can be very creative and it multiplies. So it's very exciting. Something else you can do with mirrors, you could have a table mirror outside. Okay, so especially if you have it under the trees or here it's under a flowering tree, the children will build on it so they can see, what the mirrors do. But also it changes because if it's rained overnight, you will have puddles on there. And to explore that is very interesting. Or in this case, the little pom-pom flowers fell onto it, producing a different environment. So it's not a static environment like you would have indoors, because nature keeps changing. So the children will get exposed to lots and lots of different ideas. Another idea the children love is if you have a mirror and you place it on a flat surface, the ground, or a table underneath a tree or a shrub, and let them draw on the mirror. They can put birds in the bush, or they can put themselves in there. So again, that's a creative activity that the children will enjoy. You could have a little tiny mirror. These are usually made out of plastic, and the children can go and explore what's underneath. So what's underneath this mushroom? Here's another one with a mirror, and you can see what the gills look like in that particular mushroom. So mirrors are very handy as reflective tools, but not just mirrors. A round vase with water in it, and then let the light shine through it so you can see the reflection. The children notice that the stems are bigger in the water than they are out if they sit up a little bit longer. And when the sun shines through there, lots of things to wonder about, lots of things to explore. And these round vases are not very expensive. And if you're concerned about any of these ideas that I'm giving you, all you need to do is to do a benefit risk assessment. Some people call it a risk benefit, but I always call it a benefit risk because we look at the benefits first and then the risks. So yes, this might break, but what are the risks and what are the benefits? And if you want to know more, you can contact me about that. Then we look at reflections out in nature, seeing the mountain in the water. This other one was just a little puddle, and the child had made a boat, just a leaf, and they stuck a flower in, and that was their boat. And then they slowly lowered the boat towards the water. And what they said was, my shadow is holding the boat in the water. So now then we can, this always challenges me. Is that actually a shadow or is that a reflection? And I'll leave you to guess that one. What's in the water, is that a shadow or a reflection? Another opportunity with mirrors is to reflect heat and light from the sun. So this little boy first of all started off just looking at the plants with it. And then he realized that when the sun caught it, he could actually make a light on one of the big leaves. And he could move it. He could keep changing it. And this occupied, he must have been about 7, occupied him for a long period of time. Just that fascination. Another thing you could try is a solar oven. I don't know if you've tried a solar oven before. Very simple. These are pizza boxes, and the inside of the lid has been lined with aluminium foil because it's a reflective surface. So when the sun shines on that aluminium foil and you direct the sun onto the biscuits with chocolate on them or the cheese on the wafers, the heat of the sun will melt the cheese and melt the chocolate. And the children love it. And afterwards, you document about it. So the children have commented that we've made solar ovens and that the chocolate melted in their conversation. And then if you're feeling really risky, you could do fires. And working with fire is one of the risky play behaviors identified that children have an urge or a drive to participate in. So children are fascinated by fire. And again, as long as you've done a rigorous benefit risk assessment and you follow the control measures, you can have these experiences. So just looking at a tea light in a tin, look how beautifully that tin is lit up. And none of the light escapes because it's all being reflected back. The same with a little fire bowl. There's if you want to know the description. So the children don't need to know all of that. You can choose, depending on your age of your children, what you want them to share. So you could say the shiny surface reflects heat. It reflects most of I wouldn't even tell them, I would just say that it reflects the heat. So this is why shiny materials are often used for insulation purposes, because it keeps the heat in rather than going out. This is at Riverside Cottage Nursery. They've got a wood-burning stove in the middle of the classroom. It's an outdoor nursery, and the children, being Scotland, have very often their outdoor gear gets very wet. And to dry it, they throw it over the railings. It's far enough away from the fire that adults have done their risk assessment. And by the time they want to go out again, everything is nice and warm and dry. So there the children again can learn about heat radiates, and the heat and the light come out through the glass bit, not through the other bits. There's so many questions you can ask just sitting around this little fire. Okay, so that was just a touch on, looking at reflections and why we have reflections. So let's have a look at the concept of shadows. And I love it when a toddler finds their shadow and they try and get away from it, or they try and make it do things. I'm fascinated. So basically a shadow is a dark area or a shape produced by a body coming between the rays of light and a surface. You can simplify that for the youngest children just to say, you're stopping the light. If you stand with your back to the sun, then your back is stopping the light, and that's why you've got a shadow. You know your children. You'll be able to give them the language and the words that will help them. And don't be scared that you don't know the answer. It's also very good to say to children, I wonder why. I don't know. We need to go and look it up. I had a little 2-year-old, and I found an earthworm, which I thought was very exciting, and other children thought was exciting too. And I had this little earthworm in my hand, and then I said to this little 2-year-old, I wonder what it is that's wiggling in my hand. And he looked at me and he said, Google it. And I thought, no, that's not quite what I wanted you to say. It's not the first thing we do. We first hypothesize and theorize. We wonder what it is, and then we talk about it. And at the end, I will Google it so that if it needs to, I will Google it so that they can see what the real thing is, if necessary. But again, use your professional judgment. The children noticed the bird on the decking, fascinated by its shape, and the shadow was bigger than the bird, so that initiated quite a lot of conversation. And then the bird picked up something, and the children commented that now it's changed and it looks like it's got a worm in its mouth. The shadow's got a worm as well. So, simple things. And sometimes if children are not used to looking at simple things in life, you might have to initiate it. So look at that shadow, how it's the same as the bird or nearly the same as the bird. Because with being rushed around all the time and a fast-paced world, they might not, sadly, a lot of children don't notice this detail. Often the older children don't. So the little ones often still do. So do you want to know what a shadow is? I'll tell you in a minute what the shadow is. It's quite a complex thing. These children had a tire, and they tied a piece of string around it and they started dragging it. And then they realized if they lifted the tire, they had a complete circle, depending on how they lifted. Occupied these boys for a considerable amount of time. Lillian Katz, says the best practice for early education is to allow students to be active, engaged, and take initiative in their own learning. So again, as practitioners, we know this. So let's look a little bit more at shadows. This little boy made a ladder and then he climbed the ladder. And when he was sitting at the top, he commented on his shadow. It didn't look like him. And he said, "My shadow made a teddy." I'm struggling a little bit to see the teddy, maybe the face. The other little girl commented on having fairy hair in her shadow. And the other one talked about the shadow changing, moves with her. I can make it go long and big and then small again. All of this is science, and it's all part of STEM. So it's worth exploring with the children. And it's about, we talk about flow and just slowing down and noticing. This is something you could set up with the children's help. They they hung these leaves. This is a Pinterest picture. They hung the leaves on a little line in the sunlight, and then they drew around the shapes of the leaves. So again, using photography, then using their pencils, and then putting it into the documentation. Overhead projectors, amazing invention when they first came out, but exciting to see how many centers still have overhead projectors and can use them very creatively, not just putting a written piece of work on it. These children were playing with some of the plastic animals, and what they noticed was that the shadows were larger, they were back to front, and they had no colors. That's quite an observation for a 3-year-old to make. Here's another shadow activity. And again, behind a sheet, have the light, and then the children project their shadows onto the sheet, and the children in the front have a show. Yeah, so you've got the technology of the overhead projector or spotlight, you've got the shadows, you've got the sheet and the audience, and then you document it. So again, it's linking the real with the digital. Another idea, shadow tracing using blocks with the colored panels. So again, you can have conversations about why are some of the shadows just dark and some shadows have got color. There's a yellow one and a red one. I wonder why. And whatever answer they come up with, we accept. And we tell them, great thinking. This one, the quality is not great of the pictures, but the teacher put the animals together with a child on the outside of the window ledge and the paper on the floor inside. And then the sun shone through and cast the shadows. So the children could draw around the shadows as they did. And then one child said, "Does a leaf have a shadow?" And he then reached over to the little container next to him and he got hold of a handful of little leaves and he just dumped it on top of the shadow of the animal he'd drawn. And then he turned around and he said, "Yes, they have got shadows." So again, it's about the experimenting. It's not about the end result. It's about the process. I'm sure you've heard that very often. It's about the process. This was in a bush school, and it fascinated me that the children were using bones to cast shadows on the tree trunks to tell a story, and quite intricate stories too. I remember seeing this when I came to Scotland initially from South Africa, and I'd never seen snow before, and I experienced it in Scotland. But this is it's the shadow of the bike or the bicycle, and then the snow hasn't melted there yet. So that's obviously much colder than where the sun can reach. So the sun has melted the other bits, and in the bits that are in the shadow, there's still snow. And I mean, this picture still fascinates me today. So imagine what how it could fascinate children. And they could put objects down in the snow, on the pavement or on the tarmac, and put objects down and then come back a bit later and see if the snow has made, or the sun and the snow together has made a picture. Sometimes we use pictures as provocations. So here's one. You could have a conversation about this. I wonder what this picture's about. What can you see? So there's a lot of shadows doing things, but there's actually children there as well. And then this one's another one that's interesting. You can ask whatever questions. This is obviously a spider walking on water and the shadows casting in the pool. I wonder what this is. What makes you say that? What are the dark circles? I wonder why the shadow doesn't look like the spider. What could the big shape be? I wonder if it can move. How? So can you see, you can come up with interesting questions that are also provocations. This one, I'm going to leave you to think about it. A glass of water, the sun shining through it. So what is it about light, or is it about shadow? Is it about both? Put glasses or cups of water down for the children and see what they come up with, what ideas they've got. Okay, so that was looking a little bit at things you can do with shadows. Let's look at the concept of light. So what is light? The natural agent that stimulates sight and makes things visible. And another explanation, it provide with light or lighting, so you illuminate, and you can also light a fire, so you can make something burn or to ignite. This little activity was just some of those reflective, often get them in your first aid kit, reflective sheets that you use for keeping people warm. If they've had an accident or are in shock, they make lovely covers and lovely reflective surfaces. This little boy put it over the top of the table, and then he played in there with old CDs and little torches and little lights. He didn't ask any questions. The adult didn't interact with him about it. He was there for probably about half an hour, which is a lot for a 2.5-year-old, just putting out different arrangements. So light fascinates everybody. So even your baby enjoys light. So again, this is from AI. I don't need to tell the baby all this. Okay? It doesn't need to know all of that. Even my 3-year-old doesn't need to know that. But if you're working with older children or you're exploring these concepts, then share some of that. So basically, light is the energy that enables us to see objects and the environment around us. That's the purpose of light. So you could have a simple explanation like that as, we need light to be able to see. Also, visible light is the portion of the larger electromagnetic spectrum that the human eye can detect, and it often appears as colors like in a rainbow. So often you'll see rainbow sort of colors around a light. Some of the activities we can do with the children, you could make a dark den. Children love dark spaces. It could be an old cardboard box. It could be a little tent like this, put a cover over, and then put some light objects in there and some other random objects, loose parts, and then leave the children. Sit back and listen what they say and observe their problem solving and their hypotheses and their ideas and thoughts. The next picture is, this one is just showing the benefit of having small lights nearby, because children can make shadows with them. Often we just have big lights in the middle of the ceiling that basically don't allow for shadows. Whereas when you have these smaller lights, it allows for shadows and for children to investigate and explore. And again, if you're concerned, do a risk assessment. So let's look at natural light versus artificial light. I always tried to switch off the lights in my early childcare setting, in the childcare and education setting, because I don't think we need all these artificial lights. Our homes are not lit up as bright. Obviously, this is to share some of the beautiful community playthings, objects, but you can see there's no natural sort of interest there, as opposed to something like this, with the sunlight streaming in. And this will change every day. It'll look different. It'll depend whether there's a cloud coming over, or early in the morning or later in the day. This environment will always feel different. So this is Boulder Nursery. They will very often not put the lights on in that space, so that the children learn about, when the sun goes, behind a cloud, it gets darker. In the winter, it might be dark early, and you might have to work with torches. This is similar, looking at containers, liquid, but again with natural light streaming in rather than having the big lights at the top. Another little torch activity. So just giving them torches and these animals, the children are tracing around the animal's shadow. If they can get the torch in the right position to create a shadow. So that's a skill in itself. And obviously the Halloween pumpkin with a torch or a tea light inside. And then, what are we looking at? Are we looking at shadows? Or is it light coming out? So it's a mixture of light and shadow. Very often you can purchase manufactured light producing objects, and the children love them. There's no reason not to use them. Overhead projectors, again, very popular. You can put objects on and they reflect onto the wall or onto the space. This is in Iceland, and they projected a camping scene onto that space where there was a tent. They were pretending to be camping, and then they put up a camping scene. So you can either do that with an overhead projector, or if you've got like a projector that I usually use for PowerPoint presentations, if you have a ceiling one, or if you have a lower one, just put it in a safe space. But it makes you feel as if you're actually in the forest. This is again an Icelandic nursery picture, and you can see the shadow reflections on the wall. So you can see the color in the blocks. Unfortunately, somebody switched the light on, but if you have the main light off, it obviously is more striking. But just again, a simple activity, and you don't need the fancy frame. It's just being able to put these objects there. A lot of you might recognize the magnet tiles. They're a newer toy and very popular with the children. So you've got the magnets, but you've also got the semi-transparent tile. And I've seen some amazing creations children make against the windows. So the light shines through it and it keeps changing color as well, depending on whether it's strong sunlight or dull light. I thought this was quite a good idea. I haven't seen this before. This is again in Iceland. They had an upside down table, and then they had sort of cling wrap tightly wrapped around the legs and just black paint. So the children would come and they'd paint the surfaces black. And then I wondered whether they would, afterwards, could they scratch in it to then get the light bits to come out? I mean, I wasn't there and there was no adult to ask at that stage, how they're going to use this. But I thought, actually, this would be fun to start scratching onto it and just looking at, or even just poking holes through it and then seeing the light come through the holes. Lots of potential and lots of problem solving and questioning to do. Just simple lights, a little touch light in the children's play area. They're perfectly safe, they don't get hot. You just touch them and the light comes on. Then light tables and light boxes. Eva told a story about her light box she made. Just this is a simple box with lights in it. Children love building on it. A sensory room. So again, lots of ideas to do with light. There's a light box. Again, this is a commercial one. Lots of opportunities. You can see there's an overhead projector there as well for when they need it. You could use it for art. So what they did here is they put contact adhesive on, and then the children can paint on it and create artworks on it. Imagine having the light shining through your artwork. Just a totally different experience. You could also use a light table as your science discovery table. So you might put lots of different media on there, looking for, let the children explore that. So if we look at light in nature, I don't know if you've ever looked at a drop of water in the sunshine, and you'll see a drop of water, and then next to the water, there's a light shining. Yeah. So the sunlight is concentrated to create these spots of light next to the water drop. It causes a bright spot right next to them because they act like a convex lens. And again, the children don't need to know all of that, but you can point out that it's like a torch. So every little drop of water is like a torch. Again, in nature, you'll find bubbles. This was introduced to these toddlers, and all children love bubbles. And if you look at the bubbles, isn't that fantastic? It's like magic. There's a bubble inside a bubble, and just the colors. Again, you'll be able to have a recording of this, and you can read all of this. That tells you exactly why you have those colors and how that's made. Okay? But to the children, it's just fascinating. But you can point out simple things like, it looks like there's a rainbow in there. Okay, I wonder how that bubble got inside. Just things to hypothesize, theorize, problem solve. This is a piece of playground equipment from America. It's a sun tunnel. So you can see on the top left, it's got holes, and then the sun shines through those holes and it makes the spots inside the tunnel. And if you're sitting inside the tunnel, then those holes, when you look up, looks like stars. The spots move around as the sun rotates. Here, invitations to play with light and color. The light streams through the colored perspex panel. So this is in a playground design. Again, very simple. And this is what the children have in their sandpit. It would be fun to build in that sandpit where you have these colors coming. Very simple rainbow makers, the old CDs that people are not using anymore. Whole collection. The children could make rainbows. They can make light. They can reflect. It's a bit like a mirror. So there's a lot you can do with those. Let's look at the concepts of translucency and transparency. So transparency is the quality of allowing light to pass through so that the object behind can be distinctly seen. So it basically see-through. Translucency is the quality of allowing light, but not detailed shapes, to pass through the semi-transparency. So you can sort of see, but you can't see clearly. So transparency specifies the amount of light that strikes the surface at a 90-degree angle and bounces off. And translucent material transmits light, but unlike transparent material, it also scatters the light so that the objects behind the material can't be seen. This is an aquarium with a little pop-up little tunnel, so the children can be there and they're right amongst the fish in that transparent tunnel, so that see-through glass. This is a Riverside Cottage. They've got a polytunnel as one of their classrooms. And when the leaves, and it constantly changes, because depending on what leaves have fallen on, whether the wind has blown them away, sometimes they get shadows, sometimes they get colors, and they're very much aware of the environment around them. So translucent, so glass in a water of glass is translucent, but when it becomes, and if you put ice cubes in it, it gets really, really cold and you have condensation, and then it becomes translucent. And if you put milk into the glass, you can't see anything and you make it opaque. And at the bottom is a translucent jellyfish. And Hardini and Rudd said experiences that teach children to question, to think, and effectively communicate ideas are critical for lifelong success. very important. Water bath, children love these big water baths. Very different whether you've got clear water in there or you've got murky water in there. Very different experience. And the same with glass. If you put water against it or you blow on it and it condenses, it goes from transparent to translucent. And then if you give children glasses or different cups and mugs to pour water into, the blue cup, for example, that liquid looks dark. And in the white teapot, it looks white. And then the transparent one, and this little guy was trying to empty the whole teapot of water into there, and you can see how he's flooding. But he's not stopping because there's still water in the teapot, because you can't see into that to see the level, whereas in the glass you can see the level. This is another little experience. This was a little boy who was collecting sea animals. He'd been to Deep Sea World and he was collecting the sea animals in the playground. And there were a group of children playing with Play-Doh outside. Little boy went up to the Play-Doh table, took a handful of Play-Doh, mashed it around. He told me he made an octopus, and then he threw it in his water. There we go. So most practitioners might not approve. But if you look at the learning that happens consequently, it's fine. Now it's opaque because that Play-Doh has now muddied the water. So opaque just means you're not able to see through it and it's not transparent. So again, Arnold and Gillian and Julia said, effective learning practices are connected to problem solving, exploration, skill acquisition, collaborative learning, social interaction, creation, and the capacity to criticize. The integration of digital technologies presents teachers and their settings with new exciting opportunities and challenges in designing the environment. Okay, so again, challenge might be that they put the Play-Doh in the water. Not many practitioners would approve of that. Again, here you've got water and you've got soil. And if you mix water and soil, you can make paint. If you crush chalk and you add it to water, you can make a paint. So these are just different ways for children to explore transparency. And, obviously the ochre colored one is quite opaque. But I mean, one little boy is even using it to paint the fence. Water painting, depending on the surface, it's always a different color. And the picture on the right, this little child had drawn a sun and was painting inside the sun with the water, and it kept disappearing. And then there was lots of questions about why is the water disappearing? Why is it, it's not there all the time? He got a bit frustrated. Again, looking at creativity, imagination, and role play. Sheets of fabric. So you can have opaque and transparent and translucent sheets of fabric. Let the children play in there. Explore that. I love this comment. Not sure who she was talking to, but she was very vocal. The person on the other end definitely got an ear bashing. She's got a piece of wood and she's talking to somebody. Just making mixtures, solutions would create opportunities for children to explore all these concepts. So I call this a science laboratory. It's just they get stuff from the garden, they mash it, they create. There's another example. And then the other thing children like to do is they often put objects into a pattern. So you can see how the little girls these are like different patterns for her. And this is another pattern. So you can see she's pegged a round leaf and then a long leaf and then a round leaf and then a long leaf. She did the whole sequencing it like that. And making patterns like that is linked to coding. So again, your digital literacy comes through to that. And then if we look at documentation with and for children, this is the ideal opportunity to use digital cameras or video cameras to document with the children. Okay. Teachers and other adults working with young children should develop opportunities to integrate beneficial activities involving digital technology in their teaching. This should always be led through sound pedagogical principles rather than be led by the latest technological innovation. Practitioners should support children's curiosity, critical reflection attitudes towards digital technology so that they can be used creatively, responsibly, and safely. For example, if the children find something that interests them, and in this case it was a little caterpillar, they could make a book all about bugs. They take the photographs, they cut it out, that's technology as well. They draw a really good opportunity. This is a group project. Children had lots of experiences over the Easter weekend, and they shared a drawing, and then photographs were added, linked to these and colored in. But it made it was on a canvas, but they enjoyed that. This is a primary school class, primary school group. They were making little light festival light dens. They call them cubbies in Australia. But so this whole display board is all about exploration of light and fire. There's another example. The children, you can see the children have cut out the pictures. They've stuck them in. They're very much part of the process of creating the book using digital cameras, helping with the printing and putting it in the book. So jump construction. Again, you can see this is very much children's documentation. This little boy says, "I'm bigger than the tower. I put one on the tower and the tower is bigger now." So just the thinking and the problem solving that goes with that. I thought this was quite a good one. They're going to build their own houses, and the practitioners ask questions like, which ones might blow over during the night? And the children prophesized or hypothesized which ones were stronger and which ones were going to struggle. So here you've got the examples. They cordoned off that area. Again, you can see the children have done the cutting, and the children who did the cutting on the Friday only cut out the tiny bit that was important to them, whereas the others have got sort of bigger pictures. But basically, the house made out of the wooden blocks is the one that fell over. But so they were doing sort of a little experiment or a graph. And again, that's very much linked to digital, looking at digital technology. Labeling things in the classroom, 3D mind mapping. It's all about problem solving and creativity. So here we asked the children, what do they know about fire? That we wrote their comments on the yellow strips, and then they could add with the thinking bubbles, their drawings. Then they got real objects and placed them around. And so we had a whole map of children's thinking around fire. And then, of course, you make the fire and they cook. And there's another example. Again, you can see the children have cut out the pictures. They're very much part of this documentation process. Another one is giving children the opportunity to have their play, videoed, or to give them the phone to video. So this little boy made a little stick man. I don't know if you can see the stick man, but he's got a little stick man.
Once upon a time, he was looking for flowers and suddenly found 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And suddenly he walked away from the flowers and he could jump in the pool and swam to cross, and he could never see again. The end.
Simple little story, and the children loved watching this over and over and over again. In this case, I had the camera, but the children could have control of the camera as well. Sometimes you could have a photo provocation. So this was a photo provocation of something, of a big crocodile some children had made in the sandpit with an adult. And when I showed it to this group, this little girl decided she wanted to do the same. So she drew her own version of her crocodile, then went to the sandpit, dug around, made the crocodile, and then they photographed it and they printed it for her to say, that's the cycle. Which again, I thought was a good idea. This is a lovely sort of what I call a science laboratory or a mud kitchen, whatever you want to call it, with lots of different ideas, including technology that's no longer working, but can be used in role play. So problem solving and questioning. We know how to ask questions to fill in the gaps in knowledge. That's what's important. So we can pose a question about alternative points of view. Make a causal connection between people, events, or situations. You could pose a hypothetical problem characterized by if questions. What would happen if? Recognize discrepancies and phenomena in their environment which require further investigation. So it might be, there was no hole here yesterday, now there's a hole. How did that happen? One of the things that I think we need to provide for children more readily is the loose parts. So all of these objects, most of the objects I've shown you in this presentation are actually loose parts. So loose parts promote scientific thinking skills. They give you opportunities to explore and experiment. You need time. That's the other thing, the children need time, uninterrupted time, which is quite hard sometimes for the adult. They need a space. They need a range of material, preferably loose parts. Okay, and now loose parts, according to Simon Nicholson, they're materials which can be moved around, designed and redesigned, and tinkered with. And they create infinitely more opportunities for creative engagement than static materials and environments. Basically, the more materials there are, the more people can interact. I saw this on Facebook. And this was somebody talking about the loose parts that they provided children. And again, I'm not going to have a long conversation about it, but are these really loose parts? Can they be moved? Do they have to stay on that little tray? Okay, so it could be a fun activity that the children might do, but it's not, according to Nicholson's definition, it's not a loose part. Here's the loose parts. Okay, they've obviously collected stuff from the whole setting and created a world that interests them. He also says that the constantly evolving natural world creates an infinite number of variables for children to interact with. So many different ideas. Loris Malaguzzi says children learn most readily and easily in a laboratory trial environment where they can experiment, enjoy, and find out things for themselves. This was when I was working in Australia, and I was working with a group of children, and they found these gum nut lids and collected them and took them back to the center and then added water. And you can see there's different jugs, transparent, or they're fairly opaque by now because they're a little bit old, playing with the water, pouring the gum nut tops into the water between the two chests. And in the end, this is what they had. And this little boy said, "I've made orange juice." And I said, "Wow, that's amazing. I wonder where the orange color came from." And he said, "It's from the oranges." Now, I didn't see a single orange anywhere near there, but according to him, it's from the oranges. And then he ran inside and came back with a glass for me, and he filled it up with his orange juice. And he stood expectantly in front of me, wanting me to drink it. I did drink it, but I left a bit of the sediment at the bottom. But can you see, children just have these magic thoughts and magic ideas. And what we want is to encourage that, because that will help with the digital literacy as well. And then I want to finish off with this little definition. So this is from UNICEF again. Digital literacy definitions usually focus on citizens of all ages and not on children specifically. UNICEF believes there is a need to focus more on digital literacy for children who have unique needs. In this area, there is a slow change from a risk and safety paradigm towards a right-based approaches that favors expression, play, and development. And the story behind this picture is, this was like an arts display by the sea, and the teenager in white was a mime artist. So he sat there perfectly still, and he had a mobile phone in his hand. And this little boy was, from the public, I don't know this little boy, but he came up and he watched this teenager just sit there with a phone. When you see children on their phones, they're totally disengaged from the world around them. You just see the fingers moving and nothing else. And they can sit there for a long period of time. And then after a little while, this little boy just couldn't help himself. He had to show this mime artist how to work his camera. And I just loved the confidence that he had to engage with the digital thing. So he wasn't scared of this mime artist. He was fascinated by the gadget he had in his hand. I hope that's given you some ideas on how we can incorporate digital literacy with play, and especially when we're looking at early years for children. If you want to, this is my email if you want to speak to me, or you could message Eva and Eva can pass it on to me. This is a website. I'm getting a website that doesn't have the Australia on it. So there's a British website that's being developed at the moment. And these are some of the books I've written. If you're interested in this concept, you might be interested in the STEM Detectives book, because that gives you lots of ideas about, science explorations. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Niki. Thank you so much. That was such a lovely, insightful, inspiring session. My cheeks are actually quite sore from smiling. I was nodding along with you. So